This conference will now be recorded.
Alrighty, welcome back to part 3. I guess we only got one more after this on Thursday. For all of you who are playing at home, I did get an interesting email from somebody who's been watching it on YouTube. So
Oh,
hey,
cool.
it works out. So
Yeah.
there are a few people, I guess, are accessing it that way. So it's great. So today I want to talk about form, and I kind of want to. Up until now, I haven't talked a whole lot about form. A lot of my poems are largely free verse narratives, so I don't play too much with form in a lot of my writing. But if you're interested in rhyme and meter and repetition and how different forms can kind of change what you're trying to write about, it's good. It's worth talking about and worth noting. And one of my favorite forms that I do play with on occasion is the Villanelle. So we're going to talk about the Villanelle, and we're going to show you how to write a Villanelle. And I'm going to show you 2 Villanelles that I wrote. And if you guys want to share anything, you guys can feel free to do that. So let's jump in. That key, there we go. The first thing was, hey, let's hear from you. But I know we have a microphone that's not working. But if Cole, do you have a poem that you want to share with us at all?
I don't know. I started writing something and I don't know that I think it's that. I I don't think I want to share today, but I'm gonna come
Okay.
up with a I am gonna work on that. Um, but it's so interesting to think about turning the things that you hear and the thing into poetry. I've been trying to think about that more, and I'm not having any good luck like trying to get everything sort of to fit together because it's a weird time to try to write down what people have said to you when you sort of are either online or it's everything that just my husband has said.
Those are sometimes the best poems, is when you write about things that people said. So, I mean, yeah, it's great. It's great stuff. Okay, well, we can skip the sharing for now. And let's talk a little bit about forms. Usually, when we think about form poetry, I know you guys think of sonnets. I don't know. What is it? No, elegies. No, elegies don't necessarily have to have. You get what I mean. We have those hard forms where we're usually talking about what has to come together to make this thing into what we think is a poem. And one of those elements that comes into almost every poem when anybody's thinking about poems, they think immediately about rhyme. That's the first place that novice poets usually gravitate to, trying to think about how does a rhyme play into what I'm trying to do. I stink at rhymes, to be honest. If I can be frank, I coming up with effective rhymes. That's kind of the reason why I gravitate towards free verse narrative, is because rhyming effectively is hard. It's really hard, and so yeah, it just takes time. It takes more time for me to write a form poem than it does for me to write a narrative poem, and the form sometimes hijacks the narrative for me. Sometimes what I'm trying to write about, if I'm trying to write about it as a narrative, I say what I want to say. My message comes first. In the form takes priority. And a lot of times, by that form taking priority over poem, it just kind of hijacks where you wanted to go with it. So that's one of the reasons why I don't usually play too much with form. But it's worth talking about now because of what's going on in COVID, and the Villanelle form has actually been kind of interesting for me to play with the last couple of weeks. So let's talk about the different kinds of rhymes. End rhyme is the rhyme that you guys are all familiar with. That's the hard, perfect rhyme, the same sound at the end of every line or the end of subsequent lines in some kind of a pattern. When you have 2 words, stone and bone, those are rhymes, right? If I say bee and flea, you guys are like, hey, those are rhymes. That's the end rhyme that we're usually thinking about. Internal rhymes are when we use rhyme within a line as opposed to the end of a line. The reason why we do that sometimes is it kind of creates a richer experience. It's less expected to have a rhyme internal, like in the line itself. We're so accustomed to when we're reading form poetry that we are expecting those hard end rhymes to come. And so when we mess with the rhythm a little bit and we bury a rhyme within a line, it has an interesting effect on what you're trying to write about. Slant rhyme is a near rhyme. It's a rhyme that's not quite a rhyme, things that sound similar. Trying to think of some. I should have come up with a bunch of examples off the top of my head, but stone and boat. You have the long O vowel sound in stone and boat, but you have a different end sound that's attached to it. That's one of those examples of a slant rhyme, a near rhyme, something that doesn't quite rhyme perfectly, but the similar vowel sound is sometimes enough to get us over the hump. I know I'm trying to think about my my audience here, and I know that there's probably not too many hip hop fans in here, but I personally am a hip hop fan, mainly because rhyming is so hard for me, and I'm fascinated by people like Eminem who can do it so freely. Um, so when you're thinking about some of the rappers out there, they use a lot of slant rhyme. They use a lot of near rhyme. Eminem was famous for this, right? He changed the game when he started writing his hip hop lyrics using near rhyme. He would rhyme orange, and everybody says you can't rhyme orange with anything. Nothing rhymes with orange. And then he comes up and he's like, orange? I got a bunch of oranges in storage. And it's like that near rhyme with storage and orange. It was close enough, and though the way that he pronounced it worked in the hip hop song. So that's something to think about. The near rhymes can sometimes get us over the hump if we're trying to play with a rhyme scheme. Remember, in poetry, there's no real rules. You can change the rules. You can alternate things a little bit if you need to. Slant rhyme is a nice thing to think about. So when you're thinking about slant rhyme, think about family rhymes. Think about those vowel sounds, the long vowel sounds, short vowel sounds, just those fill and fit. You have that short vowel sound I. That's the same family of rhyme. So go ahead and find what some of those are and see if there's some near rhyme that can work to kind of get you over the hump that you're working with. And then alliteration. Alliteration I like to bring up with rhymes because it's kind of like rhymes for the front part of the word, right? It's when we have the consonant sound that begins the word repeating over and over again. And it's that repetition from the front half of the word, that alliteration, that kind of sometimes has interesting effects on what we write. It helps change the rhythm of what we write. It can help set a tone. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples that we can kind of use to move forward. Some rhyme tips. I'm going to show you some of these rhyme tips while you're starting to think about how you could use them. I would always argue that you should alternate your rhyme schemes. Don't use something that is predictable. So when we think about if you gave a vowel sound in your poem, we do this a lot when we're talking about A, B, B, A, C, C, as far as rhyme schemes go. The A represents a vowel sound. The A down here represents another vowel sound. So I'm using the same vowel sound for A and A. I'm using the same vowel sound for B and B, so on and so forth. So that's how we, in poetry, we write about rhyme schemes, right? Some of you probably have come across this before. Alternating rhyme schemes so that we're not using something predictable. The roses are red, violets are blue. I am really boring and so are you. Kind of a poem. That's like A, B, C, A, or wait, A, B, C, B. That's what it is. When you have those vowel sounds kind of repeating at different points in the line. Robert Frost, I think sometimes is overrated, but some of his stuff's really great, right? So I think about 5 or 6 of his poems are amazing, and I think a lot of his other stuff is just I get bored with it because I can only read about mowing hay so many times before. I got the complete works of Robert Frost at like a garage sale, and I went through and I tried to make it a point to read through them, and there were 6 poems about birches. I heard the one and I was excited, and then there are like 2 or 3 other birch poems immediately after that in the collection. I'm just thinking, you can write about a sugar maple, can't you? Like, there's some other tree that you could write about. But Robert Frost does this very well in some of his best poems. Whether you're talking about after apple picking, or whether you're talking about stopping by the woods on a snowy evening, he uses unpredictable rhyme schemes sometimes that kind of keeps your ear guessing a little bit. So here, he uses an A, B, B, A, C, C, and then he changes the rhyme scheme as you go further in the poem. But I just wanted to share this little opening to after apple picking so you can kind of hear how it plays. My long two-pointed ladders sticking through a tree toward heaven still. And there's a barrel that I didn't fill beside it, and there may be 2 or 3 apples I didn't pick upon some bough, but I am done with apple picking now. He's playing with those same vowel sounds, repeating those rhymes, but he's doing it in a more complicated fashion than an A B or A B or A B B C C D D, so on and so forth. So he's not rhyming every line. As you go through the poem, there's a couple of lines in there that don't rhyme at all, that kind of interrupt some of these rhyme schemes. So you can kind of think about that as you are incorporating rhymes in your own poems. Alliteration. I love alliteration. It's a great tool. It's fun because, it's a way to incorporate similar sounds into a text, but it can also, by the way that it incorporates those sounds, it changes the rhythm. It can create a rhythm of to the poem itself, because a lot of those alliterative sounds often have accents with them, like a hard P. In the example that I'm going to share, the accents. If you have a hard syllable followed by a couple of soft syllables followed by another hard syllable, that alternating rhythm of hard accented syllables and soft unaccented syllables creates basically a kind of like a rhythm for your ear to follow, right? And I guess I can read the whole poem of it's called Pig. If I can open it here. This is by a poet named John Repp, and it's really short. It's really quick. So it's called Pig. My neighbor's pigs nap in the muck, in a minuscule shed, a pyramid of pig, eyes squeezed shut, a seeming grin on each face. Even the piglets inside the sow are meat. My neighbor smokes bacon each autumn, and I eat it. Pig gist, my gist. These are the facts. There are worse ways to wake than in a pile of pig. And in this, the alliteration comes in periodically when he has pyramid of pig. Eyes squeezed shut. Squeezed shut is kind of the alliteration there, but it's really that hard P that I think that comes into this piece that makes it kind of satisfying when it comes in. There are worse ways to wake than in a pile of pig. That hard P, I think, is a nice alliterative touch. And then the worst ways to wake. There are worse ways to wake. That W, that repetition of the W, has a rhythm to it as well. That's created by the alliteration as opposed to a rhyme. So I wanted to think about something that we could use to play with vowel sounds and play with rhyme and play with these different things. And I decided Villanelles. Villanelles are the first place I went when the repetition of COVID kind of started hitting us over the head, because I'm sure your days are starting to look a lot like my days, and they just don't change enough. There's not enough variation, and sometimes things that I took for granted, I'm getting just kind of sick of. So I wanted to think about, could we write some villanelles to play with form in these ways? Now, villanelle is a pretty hard form. It's a pretty strict form. It contains 5 tercets. Those are 5 3-line stanzas, and then 1 4-line stanza. That's a quatrain. So you have 3 lines, skip a space, 3 lines, skip a space. You do that 5 times, and then you have a 4 line stanza that ends it. The first and third lines of your first stanza repeat alternatively as the last line of each of the tercets that follow. So when you're taking a look at this, you have this A, The capital A1 is that first line, then you have a B sound, then you have a capital A2. Means I'm rhyming the first and third line, and then the first line is going to be my third line of the second tercet. The second line is going to be my third line of my third tercet. A1 in 4, A2 in 5. And then in the quatrain at the end, you have the first and third lines that started, that A1 and A2, become your last two lines. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I wanted to share a couple of them. I'm going to share first this one, the one from my book, Sleepbringer. This is called Canoeing Canaveral, and it's a Villanelle that I wrote about basically the story behind this one. My wife and I, when we were in college, we went on one of those spring break trips. But we didn't do the spring break trip to, Florida to the beaches. We did a spring break trip to the Ocala National Forest and to the Canaveral National Seashore, and we canoed it. So we basically spent our entire week of spring break canoeing through Ocala, and it's a fascinating place. If you're into this, once the borders open up and COVID's gone, I'd suggest going down to canoe the Ocala National Forest, because there's Silver River. Silver River is a beautiful area. It's a spring-fed river, so clear you can see all the way down to the bottom. Great wildlife to take a look at. And what's interesting was there are two islands that have been colonized by rhesus monkeys. Because they escaped from the set of the movie Tarzan that was filmed back in the 1930s down there. And so they have all of these monkeys that have just taken over everything. If you go ahead and you Google YouTube, or go on YouTube and look for monkeys of Silver River, Florida, you'll find some cool videos about the rhesus monkeys that have colonized these islands. Anyway, part of our trip, one of the first nights of our trip, we started at the Canaveral National Seashore, and there were all these islands that were kind of artificially created, right? They used to be part of the shoreline or something, and then the government dredged in between different parts of these islands to create channels for shipping traffic, I think. And so we were canoeing to all these little islands along the national seashore that were, government cut. The place we stayed, the island that we stayed on, was called Government Cut because it was cut out by the government. So down there's a lot of oyster beds and a lot of stuff. And so this is kind of the monotony of canoeing down around the Canaveral National Seashore is what came into this. So here's the poem. Canoeing Canaveral. It's hard to distinguish the living from the dead when the sun sinks low behind the hoary oyster beds. Brittle bone now sharp is shed, a subtle graveyard in the brackish flow. It's hard to distinguish the living from the dead through the government-cut channels Atlantic bled, tide inhaling, exhaling, high to low behind the hoary oyster beds. The water's whisper tells of the survivor's dread, natural wonders carved away to show that it's hard to distinguish the living from the dead, gentle dashing across the razor edge, where generations have turned from life to stone behind the hoary oyster beds. As the ancient poets might have said, even shellfish have bones, and it's hard to distinguish the living from the dead behind the hoary oyster beds. So in this, you can kind of see this line, it's hard to distinguish the living from the dead, becomes the third line in the second tercet. Behind the hoary oyster beds, filters in as the last line after this one. And you see them alternating as the last lines. And then at the bottom, you have them repeated. I did take one creative liberty, and I threw that in after show just because I liked it better. So I broke a rule. I did a no-no. But you're the writer. You can choose to do that if you want to. It's still essentially a Villanelle with the exception of this one word. So I don't feel quite so bad about that. But you can also see the rhyme scheme. Dead, bed, low, flow. Shed, dead, bled, bed, low, show, dread, dead. Edge, bed. That's one of those near rhymes. Edge, bed, stone, So I'm basically playing with two, I guess, rhyme families throughout this poem. Another one that I just wrote recently, my friends, I'm in this writing group, and we've continued to meet digitally on Tuesdays. And one of my friends has laid out a challenge for me. He's like, you have to write quarantine poems for all of us. So each of us get our own quarantine poem by the end of this COVID experience, and you have to write about it as if it was you were writing from our voice, and we have to see what comes of it. So this is my buddy Kevin. He's also my department chair, and this is what I've been writing kind of for him. And it's COVID quarantine. It was going to be Kevin's quarantine, but I didn't want to like out him too much at this. But anyway, here it is. I despise the digital in the age of COVID-19. I need only a bath, some beer, and buffalo wings. Just let me enjoy this quarantine. My scarred cornea is tormented by this backlit screen, while software notifications incessantly ping. I despise the digital in the age of COVID-19. Microsoft Teams is fun as a wandering spleen. I'm sick of everyone's belly aching. Just let me enjoy this quarantine. Open bathrobes on webcams can be quite obscene, and the GIF function and group chat is not a plaything. I despise the digital in the age of COVID-19. Forget my dream of owning adult claw machines. I'll need to save up after the market's downswing. Just let me enjoy my quarantine. I'm done with downloading apps to order cuisine and all the targeted app ad diamond engagement rings. I despise the digital in the age of COVID-19. Just let me enjoy my quarantine. So that's Kevin's Villanelle.
I love it.
Again, you do?
It's so fun. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I was
Yeah.
going for that, you know. So yeah, so that's what I've been playing with, and so I think I'm gonna give that to Kevin for his quarantine poem. But yeah, that's basically it. Again, you have the COVID-19 quarantine kind of rhymes, so I'm using that as the rhyme family. And I decided to use wings. One of the things that I would have to caution you about when you're playing with Villanelles, you're going to find pretty quick that not all rhyme families are compatible with one another. Some of them are going to sound really weird to your ear, and I was playing with that before. I tried beer. I had that line ordered so that like the end syllable was beer, and I had to rhyme beer as that secondary rhyme throughout, and it was COVID-19 beer, quarantine beer, and you can kind of hear those two rhyming families. They didn't really get along. So I tried wings because wings is kind of a near rhyme to teen. It's just different enough that it stands as something different, but it's still close enough to the rhyme family, I think. So that's essentially what I was going for with that. So those are two Villanelle tips from Daniel Ruefman. Take it for what it's worth. And so basically, my recommendations as you guys play with Villanelles, things that you need to be aware of, is when you're repeating lines, you want to make sure that you use lines that could be read multiple ways, or lines that could change meaning as you repeat them. One of a good example, I guess, from Robert Frost, if you're going to twist my arm and make me use Robert Frost as an example, stopping by woods on a snowy evening, that repetition at the end of his poem where he says, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. It's, even though it's the same exact line, the repetition of that line, the second reading of it, is a lot different than the first line, right? The first reading of it is, and I have miles to go before I sleep, and I'm tired, I need to sleep. That's kind of the connotation. But then, I have miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Kind of that memento mori, death kind of theme coming in there. He's reaching the end of his life. He's dealing with grips of mortality. So that's essentially what I'm getting from with that. I thought when I was writing Canoeing Canaveral, specifically, the image of the hoary oyster beds. I thought it was interesting because you couldn't distinguish the live oysters from the dead oysters until you tried to step on them. And once you stepped on them, of course, the dead oysters cut you up, right? That's how we discovered that you should not step on the oyster beds. When one of our colleagues, one of our canoe buddies from college, decided to try to stand on them, and we discovered that was a bad idea. So yeah, so that's where that came from. But it was hard to distinguish the living from and the dead from the hoary oyster beds, like the living oysters from the dead oysters. To me, it was hard to tell. And so you have this theme, I think, that comes into play when you start to think about those images. The same thing goes with the repetition of COVID-19. The reason why I think Villanelles are so fitting for what's going on now is because you could do something that you take great joy in. I have friends that love video games. The first week of playing video games for 12 hours a day was amazing. The second week, slightly less amazing. The third week, not amazing at all, right? And that's what I'm hearing. So I every now and again I'd hop onto Xbox. I'd talk with my buddy Johnny. He was on it constantly for like the first couple of weeks of quarantine. And then I tried to get in touch with him yesterday, and he wasn't on. And I was like, "What happened?" And he's like, I'm done. I'm done with it for a while. I gotta detox because it got to be too much. Something he loved because he never got to do it, he overkilled. And it's kind of the same thing with all of us here. We're doing the same things over and over again, and things that we used to like probably don't like so much, right? I used to really like ramen noodles. Then I went to college, had ramen noodles way too often. I can't eat them to this day. That's how it worked. Anyway, so go ahead, and when you're thinking about the lines that you're going to repeat, think about the lines that you could repeat that could mean multiple things, or that, like in stopping by woods on a snowy evening, you have the "and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." The more you hear it, the more that meaning changes, right? And we can kind of start to get a sense of the fatigue and the tired aspects of it all. Use images that are engaging, things that are interesting. So the stuff that I threw in the COVID quarantine poem, the images that were very telling for my buddy. He loves beer. Every time we go out, usually for our writers group, he's got a beer, right? And so that's his thing. Bath, I don't know why. A bearded guy swigging beer in a bubble bath just sounds cool to me. So I decided to add that in there. The backlit screen, of course, the backlit screen is hurting our eyes terribly these days, right? I can't even throw in my contacts anymore just because my eyes are so tired from sitting behind screens all the time. Microsoft Teams, he uses it all the time. And of course, I'm the jerk playing with the GIF function in the group chat during our department meeting. So of course, that was a dig at myself, a little self-deprecation, I think, to express the frustration of what it's like to have your friend as your boss. And he doesn't want, he wants to call you out and say stop playing with the GIF and that kind of thing. But I'm getting bored over here, and I need to liven things up. So that's what I was doing. So anyway, so yeah, so those are some of the things that things like diamond engagement rings, order cuisine, ordering things with apps. Yeah, I don't know. These are images that are unique to him, so it was why I included them. But you can kind of think about that as you guys are thinking about what images you're going to include. What images are you going to use to drive your poem forward? Pick ones that are interesting or meaningful in some way. Choose the rhyme families carefully. Like I said, not all rhymes will work well together. And then you're going to want to read it aloud. Read it aloud to hear how it sounds. Try not to have too much of a too much of a differentiation between, I guess, line lengths. Try to keep similar line lengths, especially with the repeating lines, because those repeating lines are going to have to work together. So you want to make sure that you can read them back to back and have them make sense. And you want to make sure that they are similar enough to the point where they don't impede the progress. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So what's your assignment? We're already there. We're a little earlier than usual, a lot earlier than usual, actually. But your mission at the end of this workshop, should you choose to accept it, write a Villanelle about your COVID experience. It's that rigid form, like I said. It's highly repetitive, but the repetition has power, right? The repetition has meaning, and our lives are highly repetitive right now, so I think it's a very fitting form to play with, given what's going on. So I'm just going to leave it there. I'm going to throw it out there. If you guys have questions, let me know. Anybody want to have a question? Anybody have any concerns? I see somebody.
Hi, Daniel. It's Caroline.
Oh.
I'm actually at my library right now, and I wanted to pop on and say hi, and that I couldn't join you today because I'm actually working.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Okay.
So I wanted you to know that I didn't forget, or I really wanted to be there, but I'm busy putting together happy packages of books for people to pick up curbside here at our library. So.
Oh, well, that's a good thing to do. That's a good thing to do.
Yes, it feels really good.
Yes, we have to do that.
Hi, Cole.
All right, so I see there's a question in the chat. Does it have any constraints related to meter? No. The Villanelle really is limited to those constraints that I discussed previously, which would be the 5 tercets, 1 quatrain, the first and third lines repeat, and then playing with that rhyme scheme, making sure that you're adhering to that rhyme scheme as closely as possible. So that's mainly what we're trying to get at. There is no constraints as far as meter. You can have long-winded lines for these Villanelles, or they could be short and quippy if you wanted them to be. So yeah, there's no real rule with meter, at least not that I've ever followed. That's a good question, though. You're welcome. All right. Well, I mean, we're like 20 minutes earlier than usual, but it's been fun. It was a fun day. Does Cole have any announcements that she wants to make, or anything that you want to add?
Well, we'll meet again on Thursday. We've got a few more days of National Poetry Month, so that's kind of awesome. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to work on this, and I think you're totally spot on. Like things get a little harder and a little less cool after you do them for, however long quarantine. So I love this. This is a fun challenge.
Yeah, it should be. I'm hoping it's a fun challenge. That's my goal. I hope you guys have fun with it. Maybe you guys will have something to share next time, Villanelle wise. That could be kind of cool.
Cool.
And of course the email is still good, so go ahead and email me if you guys want any feedback.
Cool. Well, I'll post this video. This video will be up on YouTube by the end of the day today, so we'll get it out to people.
Great. All right. The email, of course, is ruefmand@uwstout.edu if you guys are interested. Otherwise, happy writing and happy National Poetry Month.
Thanks.
All right.